Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, we're going to talk about the crazy stuff that went on over the weekend in terms of transfers as things really kicked off into full swing and kind of got out of control a little bit. And I know that everybody's looking for a bit of clarity as to what's real, what's not, and what is going on in terms of, the targets, the timings, goalkeeper, no goalkeeper, Mount, Caicedo, Rabiot, all of it. So we'll talk about that. I'm going to briefly talk about some stuff on the takeover as well as cash, as well as it ties really into everything here. And let's get right into it. So first, I want to talk about the takeover. Obviously, it's been quiet for a while. For about 10 days, we haven't really had any reports of any kind at all. And I've had an update today that gives a bit of information on what's going on. I don't totally understand the entirety of it, but so I'm kind of working to clarify a few things before I can give any more detail on it in specific. The thing I can say though is that I understand now a bit more why there is or could seem to be a bit of a conflicting information between different media outlets, that neither of them are technically perhaps conflicting, but dependent on very specifically who you talk to. The way that I understand things as of right now is that no deal's been agreed with either party. There is a preference from Rain Group for one party, but there are issues with that deal that the Glazer siblings have not agreed upon, while the it could go essentially either way because of that. It's effectively, to keep it really simple, the way that it works is that Qatar's bid at the moment could be well acceptable to the Glazers. The Ineos offer could also be acceptable, and in some ways, by some people, is viewed as better, but is not fully agreed upon between all of the parties involved if it is a better bid. And so this can go really either way at this point in time. I don't know exactly who prefers which or what, but the way that it can work here is, and I understand why one could say, why it could be said, the guy from Reuters went on a thing and said it could be fast, it could be weeks, it could be months. And the reason for that, which makes a lot of sense, is that it kind of depends on the Glazers. If they want to continue on certain aspects of one of the bids and continue talking about it and continue working it out, it could be done in a moment or it could take a long time. They could just simply agree and then that one would get the green light. Or they could decide, we're not going to get anywhere with this, let's just go with the other bid, and that one could get the green light. It could really go either way almost in an instant, but at the same time, it could take a long time to talk. And some of that's going to be about the determination of either party as well. Will they press ahead and want to keep the conversation going endlessly, essentially, and not miss out? So it's complicated, and I will try to give more details in the next day or two in more specific, but to kind of keep it basic, it's not done, but it's also close enough that one could see it being done really quickly if certain things happen, like really quickly, if certain things are resolved. And why does that matter? Well, one, it's a strong indication that there will be a sale at some point in time here. But it's also close enough, while yet being undecided, that the Glazers are not going to want to spend their own money on this transfer window. So the Glazers have a 300 million credit line that they said they would be paying down, that was used for a lot of transfers, that allows for more flexibility in the market because who cares, they can use it in lieu of installments and things like that and just pay it off. If they were staying for the long haul, they would use this credit line like cash. Doesn't really make much of a difference. Because they're likely leaving and the deal is not done, but is close, but they're also not sure which party because it's not exclusive talks yet. They're not going to want to spend this money because it will be money coming out of their own pocket. If they were a little more advanced on the deal, say in that 8 to 12 week timeline where the deal's getting done, they could work out an agreement with the party selected that would allow likely them to make some kind of deal where they'll spend that money and the party will cover it or adjust their offer to cover it, since they want to be spending in the market anyway, and they'll just pay it off when they take over. But because they're not in that stage yet, they cannot get that agreement from the parties. They cannot make those kind of deals. So they're not going to spend their own money. And this is the issue that United are running into in this transfer window, is a lack of willingness from the Glazers to spend cash on this kind of credit line and move forward with it. Okay, so that's kind of the underlining of the whole thing, is it's very close, but because it could still swing either way, and they're not getting into those exclusive talks with either party at this point in time, or they're not there yet, then they cannot make a deal that would allow them to spend this cash, or it's going to be money coming out of their own pocket, and they don't want to do that. So if they start suddenly spending money, it would likely be because that deal's been reached or because they're staying for the next 5 years. So, but it would likely be the former, that because a deal is being reached with a party. So what does this mean? So let's take the Mason Mount thing, because there's a lot of confusion. On Friday night, Chelsea rejected United's bid for Mason Mount, offered face-to-face talks. Saturday morning, I was told United were not really happy with how they were dealing with things, and that Erik ten Hag was okay with walking away from the deal should Chelsea not change their way that they're operating and change what they're doing on this deal. Now, that deserves a bit of clarification, because as I understand it, it's true, but it's not. It's true that Erik ten Hag is okay with moving away from the Mason Mount deal if it means he's still getting all of the priorities he wants addressed, which are striker, midfielder, and goalkeeper. If he has to sacrifice one of those, he is not happy at all with the situation. Does that mean he's blaming Murtaugh or whoever on the negotiating aspect of it? No. It's a matter of being frustrated, because if the money had been there earlier, if they could have moved earlier, then they likely would have lined up these deals earlier and known where they stand better. And that obviously comes back to the Glazers. So it's a mixture. It's not, oh, I'm happy to walk away from Mount. It's, I'll accept it if I can get targets that I can get, and I can still get all the priorities that I need, but I'm still frustrated because this shouldn't be this situation. It shouldn't be this difficult. Chelsea didn't really bend yet. United said, good, we're going to walk away to other targets, but we're leaving the offer on the table and you can reconsider. And they're a bit relying on Mount's side now to push. So I'll come back to Mount in a second and just talk about the Caicedo thing. The Caicedo interest is very real. United approached in April about Caicedo and McAllister to understand their situations. There's a video I have on April 30th that said Caicedo is rising up the Manchester United list. The interest is legitimate. It's there. They would buy him. He is more expensive, and so it would affect other plans, which I'll come back to later. But they would buy him. They will move for him if the Mount deal doesn't come through. It is a legitimate target. He's more expensive, but would likely be in lieu of signing two midfielders. And again, I'll touch on that when we talk about Rabiot here in a minute. Where it stands now and what is more likely and what United expect, as far as I know, is Mason Mount returned on Sunday to London for talks with Chelsea and made it extremely and abundantly clear he's not interested in Bayern. There's nothing in that at all. So there's nowhere else that Chelsea can sell Mason Mount. He wants to go to United if he leaves this summer. Otherwise, he's walking for free next year, and that's it. There's no alternative to these scenarios, and it's believed that Chelsea are more likely to reconsider and come back with a closer proposal. It's not that United couldn't be a little bit flexible. They might be willing to offer 55 up front, or maybe it goes up by a couple million. 55 total, I mean, on the deal rather than 50 plus 5. That's possible. And so if Chelsea will bend and come back to the table at nearer to that price, not at 65, not at 60 or 58 plus add-ons, but at more like 50 to 55 base fee, then United will be willing to re-enter those talks and get a deal done, which needs to be done for Chelsea by June 30th. So I'm still leaning that that's where this is going to end up, and not Caicedo. But should they not be quickly returning to the table by, say, Tuesday, then United will press ahead and start to look at making an offer for Moise Caicedo and trying to approach that. But again, I would say 65%, it goes back to the Mount thing. United have played this well. Yes, it's a negotiating tool, but it's also valid interest and they would get him. The problem, of course, is that they would rather not spend the extra 25 million so that they can address the striker, they can address the goalkeeper, and then they could look at a second midfielder as the fourth option. And they would still have the money at that point in time by not spending too much. So it's a bit of a fluid situation. It's a bit complicated. They are all talking about these things together at the same. What I mean is at the same time. So when people look at it, they might think, okay, well, Caicedo then means no Mount. Well, let's move on to Rabiot. Rabiot means what? Well, this is all happening at the same time, okay? It may not be Caicedo and Rabiot, understand. Just because you've seen the interest in Caicedo, it's more likely to be Mount and Rabiot. That move for Caicedo, what I was told as well, or what I can somewhat confirm, is that when the plan shifts to potentially looking at a player like Caicedo, he's likely to be the only signing if they were to get him in the midfield. And then still wanting to address striker and goalkeeper, but they're going to need some outs. And one of the problem with the outs is only Dean Henderson is lined up at the moment, whereas they have not really got solid outs for anybody else. So if they spend more on that midfield, it's harder to do it. They wanted to go back to someone like Rabiot later as a fourth priority. So it's all happening at the same time. Striker, goalkeeper, midfielders, and they're trying to figure out what deals can be done so they can line up the different scenarios and then move forward and go bang, 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 we can get this all done. They did a similar thing last year where they were talking in these talks with De Jong, even though it didn't get done. At the same time, they were working on Martinez, at the same time, Malaysia, at the same time, Eriksen. And when they were getting kind of the yeses and the approvals from each party, then they were able to knock down a few of them pretty quickly. And then, of course, De Jong didn't happen, and that changed. But they were able to knock down a few pretty quickly and kind of know where they were at. The idea is to address as many priorities as possible in one window because, of course, it shortens the long-term runway. The thing with the Rabiot talks is these have been going on for months. It was not yesterday they made contact. These talks have been happening for a long time. These contacts have been occurring for weeks, months earlier. I said it before. I said it on the 23rd of my video to keep an eye on it, because they were looking at it as a second midfielder, and I said it some months ago. And Fabrizio Romano today said that they had been in touch for some time with Rabiot's representatives, his mother, and all of that. Juventus have made their final offer, so now it's kind of crunch time as to which way do you want to go. And United are going to need to resolve this Mount Caicedo situation pretty quickly, so they can also realistically plan out, how does the Adrien Rabiot thing work, and what else can they do. It's all happening at the same time. It could certainly happen that they get Rabiot, but I don't think they're going to get Caicedo and Rabiot. Okay, I'll put it that way. I don't think that they will, but we will see. That is not how it was told to me. So moving on to the goalkeeper situation. Sorry, just to back up 1 second, back on this midfielder plan. There's obviously other names: Gabri Veiga, Kudus, who maybe verges on a striker as well. And they're exploring all of these opportunities, but they're going to have to really settle the Mount thing and then make an offer for Caicedo and then move on to other names at that point in time if that doesn't happen. But yeah, let's keep a focus on this because this week will really tell us if this Mount deal is happening. And I would still lean towards 65% that the Mount deal gets done and they continue on with the regular plan towards Højlund, likely at striker, and then to the goalkeeper situation. And let's talk about it. Obviously, some conflicting reports here. You've had a lot of messy stuff about an agreement being reached, then not being reached, then waiting for the club to sign off, and David De Gea wants more, and then you have this article from Mulek talking that was definitely from David De Gea's side, saying he thinks that the financial situation will lead to strengthening De Gea's hand in the contract talks, which implies he wants more than what he's already being offered of $200,000. And I'm here to try to explain it and break it down a little bit. Let me be clear. Erik ten Hag wants, at the absolute minimum, competition who would likely be a view of being the number one goalkeeper next year, but ideally just to get a top goalkeeper in who could be number one. He's very much open to keeping De Gea and signing someone like Onana, okay? But here's kind of the situation and why there's a lot of conflict about this. Number one, is reported that United and De Gea reach agreement on a contract. This was some months ago, 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago. At this point in time, De Gea expects to be the number one, It's mid-season, so there haven't been discussions where Erik ten Hag is saying, you're not going to be my keeper next year because he's the only keeper he had, and didn't want to get into those talks before the FA Cup final. The deal is heavily incentivized with big bonuses that would be based on performance and based on playing a lot of games. So if you're expecting to be number one, it's a good deal. Maybe you get paid $200,000 a week. In the end, all told. After the FA Cup final, Erik ten Hag informs De Gea that he won't be the number one, and talking about his plan, that he cannot guarantee him that spot, that he's at minimum looking for competition. Suddenly, there's no agreement again because De Gea is thinking, well, this contract, if I'm not the number one, is only worth maybe $100,000, $125,000 a week, and it's significantly lower. But Erik ten Hag and United are saying, well, we're not going to guarantee you more wages because we're not going to pay $175 to $200 if you're not going to be the first choice goalkeeper. That's way too much money for a second. I've talked about this in a video before, but I'm trying to lay it out in a bit of a better sense. The financial situation and difficulties United are having in the market then leads to De Gea believing, which is where this Mulk reports comes from, that it will force United to give him a better deal because of the budget and just offer more guaranteed wages in lieu of making a goalkeeper signing, and that's what he can push them to do. Ten Hag thinks they can get a keeper and keep De Gea on lower wages, and ideally just get a keeper, a strong keeper like Onana, who there have been talks for. And this is where we're at right now. It could be decided by the Glazers that they say, okay, well, instead of buying a keeper, just offer more money to De Gea. And the more that is spent on midfielder and striker, in terms of cash, deals, all of that, the more likely it is that when they go to the Glazers for this approval on a deal like that, it's going to say, just give De Gea a bit more wages to sign a contract. You can buy a cheap team replacement or a young keeper, but we're not going to give a lot of money for this. The more that's spent elsewhere, the more likely that happens. And that's why Erik ten Hag would prefer to get Mount at a good deal of 50-55, get his striker, and be able to then sell Henderson and address this goalkeeper situation. His three biggest priorities are goalkeeper, midfielder, and striker. There's not enough money on the table. It has nothing to do with FFP. It has everything to do with cash and money on the table. There is not enough money on the table for them to address midfielder, striker, and goalkeeper if they end up having to spend 80 on a midfielder and 60 to 80 on a striker. So it's a very complicated situation now because they also don't have a ton of sales lined up. They don't have sales for, big fees. That's why they wanted for Fred, we want 20 because 8 doesn't do us much good. We're getting $1 million in cash in year one or $1.5 million in year one. Van de Beek, they can only get a loan. Martial is going to be difficult to shift. The saleable assets are Elanga, McTominay, Henderson, but there's not a lot of cash in there, and so it's more difficult, and they're going to need to spend less in these areas and get good deals in order to be able to address this goalkeeper thing. And the more they spend elsewhere, the less likely it becomes they can address the goalkeeper. So it will be a financial rather than football if they don't get this done. Erik ten Hag wants on Onana into the club, or Costa, but looking like Onana right now. And ideally, they can still get to it. So the plan as to the moment, as to this point in time, is figure out what happens with Mount. Ideally, get him done and move on to the striker and goalkeeper kind of at the same time. Because then they'll really know where they're at, and they have those two positions while they're working on sales. Then they could potentially bring in Rabiot as well. But that would be the plan at the moment. If the Mount deal doesn't happen, it's going to throw that goalkeeper thing into flux where they're going to have to really figure out if they can get Caicedo or not. And if not, and they get a cheaper one like Rabiot as the only midfielder signing to start, then yeah, they're going to get a goalkeeper, and yeah, they're going to get a striker. So really, we're going to have to wait and see how this Mount thing plays out in the next couple of days, but they are prepared to move on to alternate midfield targets. Absolutely, they are. And Erik ten Hag being willing to walk away is a qualified statement. He needs and wants to address all of the major areas that he wants to address still. So it's not just he's okay walking away and not getting Mount. That's the issue. Okay, so I think this explains everything. Hopefully we will find out, or I can give some further updates on the Mount side of things in the next day or two, and we get resolution, and then on where it goes next, as well as give you a bit more detail on this takeover thing. Following a lot of stuff that's set to happen in the next day or two as well, with regards to finances, with regards to protests and all sorts of stuff. Okay, so thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. See you in the next one.